Hello there, my name is Moses-Gonzales, and I'm here to do my Newbery and Caldecott commercial for my children's literature class. Let's start off by saying, who doesn't like themselves modern fantasy? I know my children do. It's their first choice. So, let's get into describing what is a modern fantasy. Modern fantasies draw you in with their outside-the-box kind of possibilities. It's giants and many people, imaginary worlds, animals that can talk, or even future worlds to explore. But what makes modern fantasies so distinct that they have some elements of realism, so you don't feel you're completely trapped in a sci-fi? The two books I'm going to review are not just modern fantasies, but award-winning Caldecott Newbery winners. Before I get to the good stuff, the meat of my book reviews, let me tell you about those awards. The Caldecott Award is named after Randolph Caldecott and awarded for the year's most distinguished American picture book for children. The book I chose, Where the Wild Things Are, written and illustrated by Maurice Sendak. And that is this book. And it is very beautifully illustrated. And as you can see, there are many, many beautiful illustrations throughout this book on almost every single page. And as I read this to my child, he can't help but get distracted every single page when I read this to him, and he questions every time I read this to him, and we have to answer questions every time I read this. And so, as you can tell, it's a very distracting book. My other award winner is Something of Pure Delight, Mr. Popper's Penguins by Richard and Florence Atwater. They are recipients of the Newbery Medal Award, named from British bookseller John Newbery. This prestigious award is handed out to the most distinguished American literature for children. And as you can see, here is the book here for Mr. Popper's Penguins. And I have to admit, my children watched the movie first before we read this. But I have to tell you that my children do like the book better because the storyline is much better. So, for those of you who haven't read Mr. Popper's Penguins, the basic premise of that is a house painter who spends his off time reading about and writing to an explorer in the South Pole receives a penguin in the mail from one of those explorers. He becomes very much obsessed with the care of the penguin and the 11 other penguins that quickly follow. He begins to transform his home to suit the needs of the penguins. I don't want to spoil the book and tell you how an out-of-work house painter manages to feed all of those penguins, and 12 penguins is quite a lot. But it is the most entertaining process of the whole book. They do get into quite a lot of trouble throughout the book, and it is quite entertaining. I don't want to do any crazy little spoilers, but my children did giggle. Let me make reference for a fancy book turned into a modern day movie. I do not feel the movie has anything on the book. Jim Carrey is funny, and all but the story should have stayed more true to the original storyline. I didn't used to read books before the movies. I used to do just the movies. But recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, I tend to read the books prior to the movies. And I have to say that it's becoming more of a focus for me that I have to read the book first, because they definitely leave out a lot of main details. And this particular book, Mr. Popper's Penguins, it started out where the Mr. Popper is not a rich man living in an apartment in New York. That is definitely not true. And so there's definitely a lot of details in this book that are just silly and creative and entertaining, and it draws you in and it makes you want to read more. I can see why this book won the Newbery Award. It is very well written. It kept my son and I pleasantly attuned and giggling throughout 3 nights in a row. I could imagine if I had a younger child still in the house, like around 4 or 5, that still took baths, would just be sitting there trying to reenact like the last few scenes in the book, just, splashing away and making a mess in the bathtub. Because this book is more geared towards probably 5th or 6th graders, my older son, he's currently reading it for one of his accelerated reading curriculum books, and he is definitely enjoying it. He's almost done, and he is really enjoying it. I don't know if he likes it more than the movie. He's a tough cookie, but he is definitely moving along quite well with the book. He's liking it, and it is definitely geared towards more 4th and 5th graders. So, but my 2nd grader, he definitely enjoyed it. He giggled with me, and we got through it in 3 nights, and he wanted more. So, too bad that there wasn't a second one to go along with it. Now, to move along to Where the Wild Things Are. It is definitely a modern fantasy, because there are modern fantasy elements to this book, but it won a Caldecott Award for picture book. So, the illustrations in this book, they are definitely whimsy and imaginative and just downright humorous. So it makes you want to look all over the place. And like I said, my son just, is constantly, when we're reading this book, he asks questions, and as the, little Max is creating this crazy forest in his room, just the imagination that this author has and the illustrations that are presented on each page are just an imagination that I could not create. So, kudos. Kudos. The story revolves around a little boy named Max that is definitely very mischievous and gets sent to his room by his mom without his dinner. In his own imagination, he transforms his bedroom into a thick forest and launches himself into a world of wild things, and he is pronounced king. Rightfully so, right? It's his own imagination. I'd want to be queen. By nightfall, Max is longing for the comforts of home and his mother. Max decides to be part of the wild things and transform his room back and to return to his dinner. Where the Wild Things Are happens to be one of the most well-known picture books. I mean, it's a book that was read to me when I was a child, and I've now read it to my children, and I'm sure my mom, it was read to her when she was a child. It's been around for decades. The imagination that was put into it and the colorful drawings that correlate with the storyline makes it very appealing to not just young children of, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, but even adults, it brings them back to their youth and makes them kind of bring back into their imagination. So, with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed my book reviews. I hope you take the time to read these books. I'm pretty sure you've all read Where the Wild Things Are, and I'm sure you probably even have a copy at home. Maybe pull it out, read it again. I'm sure your children wouldn't mind reading it one more time. And if you haven't read Mr. Popper's Penguins, I would hope that you go check it out at the local library, because that's what I did, and read it, because the storyline is much different than the movie, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, on that note, goodbye, and thank you for your time, and hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.